What's going on, everyone? Coming to y'all with yet another knife review. This is kind of a two-in-one, and also kind of not, because today I'll be reviewing the Schrade Landshark, both the original, made by Taylor brand Schrade, and the Delta series Landshark, made by New Schrade, which, let me look at the packaging to get the name right, is the American Outdoor Brands Schrade, which, to my knowledge, has also been called Smith & Wesson Schrade, because I believe they are owned by Smith & Wesson, or Smith & Wesson owns them, or they own Smith & Wesson, or something along those lines. There's some kind of affiliation with Smith & Wesson. So, to me, this is kind of interesting because this is not one of my versus videos necessarily, but I will be framing this by kind of showing the two knives against each other because they are two versions of the same design, and I feel like it's inevitable to show differences whenever this happens. You know, if I were to review the Byrd Metal Generation 1 and the Byrd Metal Generation 2 in the same video, I feel like I'd inevitably draw comparisons between them. The same thing if I reviewed like a Delica 3 and a Delica 4 in the same video. It's just kind of unavoidable. So this is technically just a standalone review, but it kind of doubles as a comparison video because these really are two different knives, both following the same overall lines, but there is quite a few differences between them. So first, I'll start with the packaging. The packaging for this original Landshark is the old, simple, straightforward box. Just the gray and green. Got our model number there. Same information around the sides. Barcode down there. And when we open this up, there's not too much to really show. Just the plastic bag and then the information and a warning about California, which I think every knife should have a warning telling you not to go to California. That's right. And then we have the Delta series Landshark packaging. This was a clamshell, came just like so with the information. Turn this over, and we can see shows the layout, some of the specs, and then we have our information down here. So that's how the knives come to you. I always act like people care about packaging. I don't know if you actually do, but I save the packaging to show it off anyways, so there you go. So, yeah, I'm going to be reviewing both this old version and this new version. I did the exact same testing on both of them to see which one was the better performer, and I came up with some very interesting results. That testing was primarily each one of them going through 75 cuts of fairly thick cardboard. And then I also have put both into my EDC rotation to see which one has held up the best for everyday carry use. And I feel like I have enough data to kind of talk about these things now. So the blade's very interesting. I'll start with this older version here. This is a 3-inch blade made out of AUS 8, as is stamped on the back. You can see there. Which, one interesting thing to me about this is with this being made in Taiwan, and it is a Taiwanese-produced blade, I do believe it to be genuine AUS 8. Taiwan has a very easy time getting a hold of many Japanese steels. So it cuts like actual AUS 8, it performs like actual AUS 8. And the reason I mention that is because you may say, well, why would they fake AUS 8 as a stamp? It's not so much a matter of faking it, but when a knife is made in China, it almost always, not always, but almost always, will not actually use the steel that it claims it uses. It'll use a Chinese proprietary equivalent. So if a Chinese knife is marked 440A, it's 9 times out of 10, 7CR 17 MOV. When a Chinese knife is marked AUS 8, it's almost certainly 8CR 13 MOV, 8CR 14 MOV, or even occasionally 8CR 15 MOV. It's usually one of those steels. When a knife is marked 440C, it's usually a 9CR 18MO. When a knife is marked VG10 from China, it's usually a 10CR steel. I think it's 10CR 15CO MOV or something along those lines, and so on and so forth. So with this being Taiwanese produced, I know it to be an actual Japanese AUS 8 because it's very easy for Taiwan to get Japanese steel. Has this kind of beautiful modified spear point design, and I say modified because we do have a little bit of recurve right here in this section of the blade. Maybe you can see that, providing an excellent amount of belly. Not amazing, like not crazy, but excellent for EDC. It's just enough to give us the draw cut we need to open up our packaging very effectively. So we maintain that super fine tip that spear points are great for, and this is a very fine tip, but we also get the belly that we would normally get out of a clip point or a drop point for typical EDC tasks. It is a black-coated blade, as you can see here, and it's kind of a Teflon coating. It did start rubbing off fairly easily during my cutting testing with it, but I love the way that these worn-coated blades look, so I don't mind that at all. Nice high, flat grind. Now, how did this blade slice? Like a freaking laser. This thing cleared through cardboard like it was no one's business. It just zipped through it, no problem whatsoever. It was an excellent slicing blade, and it was very comfortable in the hand while doing it. I'll get to that when I get to the handle. So overall, the blade is fantastic. The AUS 8 they use, pretty good stuff, honestly, as far as AUS 8 goes. Did it dull after that cardboard testing? Yeah, of course it did. I have videos posted showing the edge and how it cut paper after 75 cuts through cardboard, and then I did another one where I showed how it honed up after 30 seconds on the honing steel, and it's wearing that same edge now, and honestly, that same edge is nice and freaking sharp. It takes a very, very fine edge, which I really like. So that is the blade on the original design. Now let's look at the blade on the Delta Series version. And right away, we can see some major differences. One of them being this is a traditional spear point. Okay, this is very similar to something like a CRKT M16 blade, which is to say it's not modified, we don't have any belly or recurve in it. And if we bring in the original to show side by side, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. See how the one on top here has that slight amount of belly towards this section? Over here you can see this is just a very straight point, which gives us a very fine tip, and I mean even finer than the original design. The original design had a great tip for penetrating clamshells or bubble mailers, but this is even crazier. I mean, it's really, really refined. But the downside is we lose that belly, which means it's not as great for pull cutting when we're doing that kind of motion with our knife. As you can see, the blade is marked AUS 10, and this is interesting because I had that whole spiel about how Chinese knives, and this is made in China, okay, this is Taiwan, this is China. I don't care where a knife is made. I don't think it in any way affects the quality, but I do think it's interesting when it comes to steel because I know how hard it is for China to get actual Japanese steels. I've talked to many people in the knife industry. I've been all over the forums. I've talked to some of the smaller companies. I've talked to custom knife makers over time. And one thing I learned is Japan doesn't like to export its steel to just anywhere, and China in particular seems to have a hard time getting it. So while I'm not saying this is for sure not AUS 10, I'm saying there's always the possibility that this AUS 10 may actually be a Chinese equivalent to AUS 10, which would put it somewhere closer to the 9CR18MO field, which is China's 440C. And 440C and AUS 10 are also roughly equivalents from different countries. It kind of goes, 440C is the American version, AUS 10 is the Japanese version, 9CR18MO is the Chinese version. Not to be confused with 9CR18MOV, which is China's version of 440B. Now, how did it perform? Honestly, it performed pretty decently. It lost its edge the same way that this AUS 8 did after that much cutting. And it was a little tougher to get the edge back to it. Not really, like after sharpening, or after honing rather, its edge just wasn't quite as fine and sharp as this one was down here. But a little more time spent with it, and I got it back to a scary razor edge without actually having to hit a proper sharpening stone. So the steel performed just fine. I will say, in terms of AUS 10, I would have expected, better edge holding capabilities when compared to AUS 8. So if this is true AUS 10, it may not be heat treated quite as well as it could be at its fullest potential. That said, if it is 9CR18MO, I don't feel like that's too much false advertising. It's just kind of the way Chinese knives do operate. The coating on here held up very well to all of that cardboard. I believe this is a titanium nitride, and it just is much more durable and clung to that blade much better. Now, in terms of slicing, this did not slice nearly as well. Okay, it bound up usually right around here in the cutting at many points throughout the testing with it. So, if I'm being completely honest, no, this is not as good of a slicing blade as this. This will slice much better than this will. This will penetrate better than that will. So, you have your pros and you have your cons. This is a hollow grind, kind of a saber-style hollow grind, very, not very thick on the edge, but it does start mid-spine down or mid-blade down, which means it's just not quite as thin of an edge as it otherwise could be had they started the grind a little higher. There's the thickness of the blade, and I forgot to bring that in with the original. You can see the thickness is compared. The original is also a thinner blade stock, which is what lent to it being, or part of what lent to it being, a better slicer when compared to the Delta series. Now, how does AUS 10 perform? Overall, it's going to be a lot like 440C, but it's going to be a little more rigid, a little more tough. I believe it has tighter grain structure, and it should have better wear over time when compared to American 440C. So it's a small upgrade in many instances over 440C, which is to say it should be a big upgrade over AUS 8. I just found that this performed honestly very comparably to this. So that is the blades. Let's go into deployment and lockup, starting with the original version yet again. This is going to be a somewhat longer video because it is reviewing 2 knives at once. We can see we have 2 different methods of deployment here. We have the flipper tab and we have the thumb plate. The flipper tab is interesting because it's actually a separate piece that pushes the blade out, and I can best show this whenever I kind of close this and start to push this back. You can see how it begins to pull that up. I can actually fully open the blade now, and this piece is just separate, and whenever we put pressure on it, it basically acts like a lever springing this blade forward. This is because this uses the old Schrade magic technology, which is a very interesting form of speed safe, or not speed safe, that's Kershaw's thing. Very interesting form of spring assist. I always found that it had a really good feel to it. I really liked the way that it operated, and it's kind of something unique in the spring assist world. I don't know, I just am a big fan of it. Now, all that aside, the flipper is very comfortable to actuate. It has good jimping, which gives us a good grip. It's not sharp on the tip. It's just a dream to actuate. It's in no way uncomfortable. But in addition to that, we have the thumb plate, which operates very similar to a thumb disc from Emerson. Various knives over the years have used thumb plates. Cold Steel used to use it sometimes. Kershaw used to use it sometimes. Very simple. It's jimped well so we can get good grip on it. Just dig your thumb into the side of it and flick the blade open. Now, if we do that, we will have to manually close this flipper ramp unless we want to put our thumb against that to keep us from going forward on the blade. We certainly could, but we kind of lose out on some of our grip, so we kind of had to fold that down and then go to use the knife. The knife does deploy very quickly, however, and it locks up tight. There's no play in this up and down. There's no play in this side to side, and we have an adjustable pivot screw if we ever needed to modify or tighten that up. But after all that testing, I had no issues with that. So deployment and lockup is good. It is a liner lock. Here is your engagement, nice and early. And before I forget, I do want to mention there is a safety here, so we can flip that up, and now the knife is impossible to deploy. Flip it down, open the knife up, but we can't engage the safety to keep the knife from closing. It doesn't have like a lock system built in, so it is just one way. I personally never use these safety mechanisms. I find them annoying. I find they get in the way, so not my bag. Now, going on under the Delta Series Landshark, this is using what new Schrade is calling its Nitro Assist technology, and for all intents and purposes, I can't identify a difference between this and a standard spring assist, or just any run-of-the-mill spring assist. It feels exactly the same, and I haven't taken it apart to look in there and find out what the differences may be. Just know that in terms of operation, it feels no different than operating any other spring-assisted knife on the market. So it does lose kind of something special that the original had, but I get it. You know, it's technically a new company. I don't know if they got the rights to that design or not. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Either way, this is what we have now, which does, lead to a different ergonomic matter whenever the knife is fully open, because now we have this bit of flipper exposed. I'll get to that when I talk about the handle and ergonomics. But the speed on this is good. It comes out nice and fast. One thing I do want to say, though, is that the flipper is nowhere near as comfortable to use. It is jimped, but it's kind of sharp here on the tip. And I do notice that whenever I'm actuating it, it bites into the finger significantly, especially when compared to this, which was pleasant to use. This, not as comfortable, really, and it does bite into your finger a little bit more. But it does come out nice and fast, and it does lock up tight. No play side to side, no play up and down. Here's our liner lock engagement. You can see it's a little later than on the early version, but, honestly, that could change from each individual knife to each individual knife. That tends to be the case with these more affordable knives. So the lockup and speed on both of these is good. I think it's a little bit better on this original version. If I don't bump into the reviewing surface there. There you go. Matter of fact, let's just go ahead and open these both up at the same time. Make sure I don't bump into each other here. 1, 2, 3. Which one opened faster? Do it one more time. 1, 2, 3. Seem pretty comparable to me in terms of speed. Let's move on down to the handles. So on this one, we have the red aluminum. I love this red aluminum handle. It doesn't just come in red. You can get it in a variety of colors. Red is just the version that I happen to have here. Excuse me while I put some things over to the side. I happen to have the red version. It did come in gray, it came in black, and it came in this wonderful color shift style, which I actually have the mini Landshark. Give me just one second. I do own and have reviewed the mini Landshark that has this color change style, and it's beautiful. It can go from purple to green to blue. It's just a beautiful kind of shifting color pattern. Reminds me of a fishing lure. So it came in that as well. And I believe the gray-handled version had a gray titanium nitride blade as opposed to this black Teflon. So, love the look, the color of the handle, if I can speak properly. Love the color of the handle. One thing that I love about this is it's a very nice presentation because we have the female heads of everything on this side as opposed to having the adjustable male sides of everything. So this does have a nice, sleek, and presentable look to it. In terms of ergonomics, this thing is beautiful in the hand. It's nice and thin, so it carries very unobtrusively in the pocket, and I got no hot spots off this while I was doing my cut testing with it. So I do love the handle on this knife. By the way, handle size is about 4 inches long. Forgot to mention 3-inch blade here, 3.1-inch blade here. But I do love the handle on this. I find it feels very nice. Aluminum is one of my favorite handle materials, and I love seeing all sorts of different colors available. Coming over here to the Delta version, we can see they've replaced it with G10, and this is the only way you can get it, is just black G10, black plain edge blade. As opposed to this, which, like I said, had gray, black, red, and color shift with the black blades or gray blade, and then plain edge or partially serrated for this version. So, significantly less options on the Delta series. That said, the G10 provides pretty decent traction. Honestly, it feels good. And it has this kind of contoured shoulder, which means it does feel nice in the hand, the handle itself. Get to some issues possibly when I talk about the clips. But one issue in terms of ergonomics I'm running into is caused by this flipper tab here. My hand is a medium-sized hand. It wraps around this pretty much perfectly, but now my pointer finger is bumping in to this, what I mentioned earlier was a fairly long and sharp flipper tab, which does cause a bit of a hot spot right there, and it's not exactly pleasant. Is it a big deal? No, but I wanted to mention it. Handle shape is largely the same as the original here, as you can see, but one difference is it's notably thicker. So if I bring these two knives in, let's go ahead and close these up so I can put them head to head. If I bring these two knives in and put them at the same spot, you can see, maybe not notably thicker, but it does feel thicker in the hand, and it certainly feels thicker in the pocket. Now, this can do two things. It can make it feel a little more ergonomic in the hand to someone with larger hands, but it also certainly makes it more noticeable when you're carrying it, and not everyone's a big fan of that, if I'm being completely honest there. So the handle itself is fine. Maybe slightly squared corners on this, even though it is contoured. I don't really notice it feeling blocky, but it's maybe it is just a bit squared off. Also, I hope my lights flickering aren't bothering anyone. I have no idea why they're doing that, but I'm starting to feel like my breaker might be going bad, which would not be a fun time. So, the handles on these two knives, this one I think is excellent. This one I think is okay. Moving on to the pocket clip, this is an area where the Delta absolutely fails. Like, if we look at the original, yeah, it had issues. It was only for one position, right-hand tip up, but it carried nicely. Matter of fact, I don't have my pocket with me for that purpose, but I'll bring these papers over, which are notes from other reviews I've already done. You can see how this carries, and no, screw it, I'll go ahead and I'll show how this carries side by side. You can see how nice and deep the Delta, or the original carries compared to the Delta, but this is still adequately deep. I like having something to grab onto. This gives me just enough to grab onto, and it's carrying in the orientation that I prefer, which is nice. Downside to this clip, aside from it only being positioned for right-hand tip up and not at least swappable for lefties, is that it's mounted with one screw. But the upside is it has great tension, and it doesn't have so much clearance off the handle that we feel it in our hand when we're using the knife, nor does it flare up towards the end here too much to where it's catching on everything. Tension on the clip is perfect. So that's the clip on this version. The Delta version is an absolute downgrade in every way, in my opinion. First of all, it's big and goofy. It's almost the full length of the handle of the knife, and because of that, yeah, you feel that clip in your hand. It's unavoidable. It's taking up so much space, and it's also got a lot of clearance off that handle scale, which, it does mean it can accommodate thicker pants much more easily, but it also means it's going to cause more of a hot spot for long-term use. It also flares up a little bit more on the end. I don't think this flare is too bad here, but it does introduce you to more possibility of the snagging on things as you're walking by. Other issues I have with the clip, let's see if I can get this to show. Yep, you see that? how it's kind of separated from the top of the knife here. I can fit my fingernail onto that. Yep, just like that. You can see that clearance. And I also have that same issue over here. Yep, you can see that there. So it's not making full contact. Additionally, the tension on this is not great. It's not super weak, but it's definitely not super great. So the clip all around, in my opinion, is a fail on the account of the Delta version. I don't like this pocket clip at all, and I feel like it could be much, much better than it currently is. Another thing is the lanyard hole is in the fact that we do have one on the original and not one on the Delta. That's not too big of a deal. This carried tip up, so it made sense to have a lanyard. With this carrying tip down, you couldn't really use a lanyard anyways unless you took that clip off. So not a big issue. One difference between these two knives is the construction. This is a backspacered knife. It is not a flow-through pillar design, so it would be a little more difficult to clean. This is a full flow-through pillar construction, so it's much easier to blow things out. No skeletonizing on those stainless steel liners, though. And I forgot to mention this during deployment and lockup, but the Delta took a bit of a step back in terms of what's in the pivot point. You can see we have, if I can get this to focus, Teflon washers there in the pivot point of the Delta. Meanwhile, the original, if you can see down in there, maybe you can see that, had bronze washers in there. So this had a better washer method in the pivot point than this does. So just kind of some interesting differences, some interesting comparisons, which I feel are inevitable. And I hope I'm not sounding too negative or complaining too much about this new design. I just feel like it's a step back in practically every single way, and that's really odd to me. I mean, there are some upsides to this one. We have double-sided pivot screw or double-sided screws for the pivot and the body, so we can kind of adjust on two sides. Maybe get our centering a little more cleared up if it has issues. By the way, here's the centering. Lists to that right-hand side on this Delta model. On the original, focus, if it wants to focus. A little bit better, though it is still listing slightly to the left-hand side for this one. So centering on either one is perfect. A little closer to perfect on the original, but that's probably going to vary case by case as well. Weights on these two knives, we're looking at 2.8 ounces on the original model, 2.7 on the Delta series. So this is a bit lighter, courtesy of those G10 versus the aluminum. In hand, you don't feel the difference. In pocket, you don't really feel the difference in weight, but it is technically there. 0.1 ounces. It's something I can mention. It's a point technically in the favor of the Delta series if you care about having the lightest weight knife you can humanly have. So overall, what would I say about these knives? Do I recommend them? Well, kind of. Price points on these is interesting. Right now, you can get this original series Landshark on eBay for a whopping low price of $18.99, so right about $20. That's a steal. Fantastic price. Now, obviously, when it was in production, the price was a little different. It was about $35. It was still worth $35. The Delta series version sells for about $35 to $50. I got it on sale at Knife Center for $28. But in general, you're going to pay $35 to $40 for the Delta series version, and that puts it in some very steep competition that it may not fare all that well against. I'll start by being generous and showing one competitive option for both of these. Let's go ahead and get these open. I'll show one competitive offering for both of these knives that I feel like both of these knives beat, and that's the Gerber Highbrow Compact. Oh, got to disengage the stupid safety. 7CR 17 MOV blade, aluminum handles, Axis crossbar type lock, which doesn't lock up super well. I have up and down blade play. Super chunky handles. Clip that doesn't sit on the handle very well. Price tag about $35 to $40, I believe. This is a knife that either of the Landsharks will readily beat in terms of competition. But that's my generous note to the Delta series Landshark, because while I feel like the original stacks up really well against the next few options, I feel like the Delta drags behind each and every one of them and would be outperformed by all of them. So let's start with the Sencut Scepter. 9CR 18 MOV blade, which, nice high flat grind, kind of a hybrid Wharncliffe drop point style. Great cutting effectiveness. Handle is your choice of G10 or micarta. Liner lock design. It is a ball bearing deployment system or pivot system, which very drop shut, comes out fast, locks up tight, deep carry clip, reversible to the left hand side. Price about $40. the Sencut Scepter is a hell of a knife to compete against. Next up, Civivi Elementum. This one's in Damascus, but they usually come in D2, about a 3-inch blade. Your choice of either G10 or micarta handles, or carbon fiber if you go with the Damascus version. Liner lock design, also a ball bearing system. I did finally kind of oil the pivot on this one to get rid of some of the grit, because it did have a little bit of grit, and it did never want to wear in, so I did put a little bit of oil in there, and now it drops shut nicely. Great deployment, great lockup. Price for the standard version about $50. Now it's in that same ballpark, and it competes really favorably. Another one I've reviewed is the Kaiser Infinity. This is part of their Vanguard series. Flipper deployment, also on ball bearings. Look at this action. Just look at that. Is that not the most drop-shut knife you've ever seen in your life? Comes out fast, locks up great. M690 on this one, micarta handles. Or there is a G10 version as well. Deep carry clip, price about $60. Yeah, it's higher, but I feel like it's still in the same range. You know, 40, 60, that is comparable. And then the last one is cheaper. Okay, this is the Gonzo. Okay, the Gonzo Firebird, model FH41S. D2 steel, G10 handle scales. Great action on this one. Smooth deployment, tight lockup. This thing has great cutting performance. That blade is a laser through any material that I'm cutting with it. Very ergonomic in hand. Deep carry clip. Price tag is a whoppingly low $23. Now again, everything I've shown is a competitive option. I feel like the original Landshark stacks up very nicely against and can readily compete with. However, the Delta Series Landshark falls short of all of them except for the Gerber Highbrow Compact. So, am I saying that the Delta Series version is a bad knife? No, not by any means, not by any stretch of the imagination. Matter of fact, if this was 8, 9, 10 years ago, this would have been one of the best knives you can buy for the money. The problem is it's not 8, 9, or 10 years ago, and competition for this price range has become so much more steep. Oh, I did forget to mention there is jimping topside of this blade when compared to the original. The jimping is pretty adequate. You know, it's not great, it's not bad, but it does lock the thumb in. So, sorry, forgot to mention that. But yeah, my point is that it does have a hard time competing against the amazing world of budget knives today. While it may have been, or it would have been, a great option back in the day, today it just doesn't necessarily perform as well. These two may both be Landsharks from Schrade, but they really are entirely different breeds. So I'd recommend picking your breed wisely when picking up your next EDC blade. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, peace, and I'll see you later.